Hello, hello. Issues of the day. I'm happy to be back. This is the weekend intelligence brief. Saturday to Sunday, 11th to 12th July 2026. Frederick, cybersecurity. I protect medium enterprises. Good morning and welcome to Issues of the Day, the weekend intelligence brief from Frederick, cybersecurity. I'm Frederick Wakulyaka, founder of Frederick Cybersecurity, protecting medium enterprises in financial services, professional services, and healthcare. This is your strategic business intelligence for the weekend of 11th and 12th of July, 2026. This is not a cybersecurity incident briefing. You get it with the daily business intelligence brief, which runs daily, Monday to Friday. There is a post every day. Then you get the weekly business intelligence update, which summarizes the week's in business intelligence. So, without much further ado, this is the publication where we step back from the week's technical noise and look at the regulatory changes, the economic conditions, and the policy developments that will shape how you run your organizations or your organization over the months and years ahead. 3 developments have occurred this weekend. None of them is a cyber incident. None of them will appear in a threat feed. All 3 will change how your business is assessed, regulated, or held to account within the next 12 months. And 2 of them will do so within a matter of days. The first is a regulatory parameter that moves on Wednesday. On the 15th of July, the Financial Conduct Authority begins regulating a category of lending that has operated outside the consumer credit regime for a decade, and the criminal liability attached to getting it wrong applies from that morning. So this is on Wednesday, coming Wednesday. The second is an enforcement body that has quietly become operational and is now using automated analysis to identify directors it intends to disqualify. And the third is a government-backed program that has for the first time established a mechanism to measure and compare how well individual employees keep their people healthy and in work. We all fall under this because I also employ people, so I have to be very careful. So the common thread across all 3 is the same one that has run through this publication for several weeks, though it presents itself differently each time. Obligations that were once discretionary are becoming mandatory. Information that was once private is becoming visible. And the gap between a business that can evidence its compliance, and a business that merely believes it is compliant is becoming the gap that determines outcomes. If you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe. The full written edition is on LinkedIn. Let us begin. Story 1. The perimeter moves on Wednesday. A decade of unregulated lending becomes a criminal matter. If your business lends more money to consumers in installments, or if it arranges for a third party to do so, or if it has assumed for years that a particular product sits outside the regulatory perimeter because it charges no interest, then Wednesday, the 15th of July, is the date on which that assumption stops being true. From the morning, entering into an agreement, from that morning, entering into an agreement of the relevant type without the appropriate permission from the Financial Conduct Authority is a criminal offense. Not a supervisory matter, not a supervisory matter, not a remediation exercise, a criminal offense. That is the sharp end of the story. And I want to be honest with you about who it actually touches. It applies to a narrower population than the headlines suggest. But the strategic reading matters to a far broader population. And I will come to that because it is the part that should concern you, even if you have never issued a line of credit in your life. First, the facts. The product in question is what the Financial Conduct Authority calls deferred payment credit, and what almost everyone else calls buy now, pay later. Like you have Klarna, you have ClearPay, later. In regulatory language, it is an interest-free credit product repayable in 12 or fewer installments over a period of 12 months or less, which has until now been exempt from regulation. In commercial language, it is the payment option that has grown from approximately £60 million of lending in 2017 to more than £13 billion in 2024. And according to the regulator's own Financial Lives research, roughly 1 in 5 United Kingdom adults used it in a 12-month period. 1 in 5 adults, £13 billion outside the perimeter entirely until Wednesday. So this has been out of the Financial Conduct Authority's purview, but it all is changing on Wednesday. From the 15th of July, referred to by the regulator as Regulation Day, an agreement of this type becomes a regulated credit agreement where the lender and the supplier of the goods or services are different businesses. That distinction is the whole game, so let me be precise about it. A lender providing credit to a consumer to buy something from a merchant is inside the perimeter. The merchant selling the goods is not. A retailer offering its own installment plan directly is not. The distinction is structural. It turns on the relationship between the lender, the merchant, and the consumer. It does not turn on the branding of the product, and it does not turn on whether anybody involved thinks of themselves as being in financial services. Now, the part that catches people, and I want you to listen closely if any of this touches your business, firms already Firms already holding consumer credit permission may continue lending on that permission. Firms that do not hold it but were conducting the activity before the legislation landed could register for something called a temporary permissions regime. That registration window opened on the 15th of May and closed on the 1st of July. It is shut. It did not close on Wednesday. It closed 11 days ago. And here is the detail that I suspect a number of firms have misread. Firms inside the temporary permissions regime have 6 months from regulation day to submit a full authorization application. But they must comply with most of the handbook rules from regulation day itself, not from the date their authorization is granted. Temporary permission is a permission to keep trading while the paperwork is assessed. It is not a grace period on conduct. Any firm treating it as a grace period on conduct has made an expensive mistake, and it becomes expensive on Wednesday morning. The obligations that arrive on Wednesday are substantive rather than procedural. Lenders must carry out proportionate credit worthiness and affordability assessments before extending credit. They must provide clear and accessible information about repayment schedules, amounts due, and the consequences of missed payments. They must support customers in financial difficulty and, where appropriate, signpost them to free debt advice. Their customers gain access to the Financial Ombudsman Service for agreements entered into after regulation day, and the whole activity falls within the scope of the consumer duty, which means the regulator will assess it not against a checklist but against the outcomes it produces for customers. The last point deserves a moment because it is the one that trips up firms new to regulation. The consumer duty does not give you a list of boxes to tick. It gives you an outcome to deliver and holds you responsible for whether you deliver delivered it. You cannot comply with it by following a process. You comply with it by producing a result and by being able to demonstrate that you produced it. Now, here is what makes this a strategic story rather than a compliance story. And it is the reason it belongs in a business intelligence brief rather than a legal update. In the same week that the Financial Conduct Authority prepares to expand its perimeter to capture £13 billion of previously unregulated lending, it has also published proposals to narrow the scope of the consumer duty for wholesale markets. Read those two moves together, and the picture that emerges is not simply a regulator expanding, it is a regulator reallocating. It is pulling regulatory attention toward retail consumer harm and away from wholesale activity where it judges the consumer protection case to be weak. And it is doing so at the same time as the Financial Services and Markets Bill, introduced to Parliament in May, proposes to repeal the majority of the Consumer Credit Act 1974 and transfer rule-making authority from primary legislation to the Financial Conduct Authority itself. That last point is the one that should hold the attention of any board in a regulated sector, and I want to spell out why. When rulemaking moves from statute to regulator, the pace of change accelerates and the visibility of change decreases. A change to primary legislation is debated in Parliament. It is reported in the press. It is telegraphed months in advance. You hear about it whether you are looking for it or not. A change to a regulator's handbook is published in a policy statement that most businesses do not read. Like when I issue the weekend intelligence brief, many people will not read it. So I always take the effort to come out and give you a manifestation of what the fine print was talking about in a visual manner, hoping that those who watch will take an interest in reading the fine print eventually. Even if you miss it, you are not going to miss. If you watch this, you are not going to miss what the fine print, the message the fine print had for you. So the Consumer Credit Act, for all its age and awkwardness, has one considerable virtue from the perspective of a business trying to plan. It changes slowly and it changes loudly. What replaces it will change quickly and quietly. So what does this mean for the business this publication actually serves? Very few of you are buy now, pay later lenders. I am under no illusions about that. Rather, more of you are in financial services, firms that will now find a new category of regulated competitors sitting alongside you, subject to the same consumer duty, but arriving with a very different operational history and a very different set of systems. That is worth watching, because when a regulator brings a new population inside the perimeter, the early enforcement cases set the tone for everyone already inside it. Rather, more again are in professional services firms whose clients include lenders, merchants, excuse me, and payment providers, who will be asked in the coming weeks whether a particular arrangement is inside or outside the perimeter. If that is you, the question is landing on your desk this month, whether you are ready for it or not. And a substantial number of you are simply businesses that offer your customers a way to pay in installments, either directly or through an arrangement with a finance provider, and have never examined the legal structure of that arrangement closely because it worked and nobody asked. If your business falls into that last category, the question to answer this weekend is a factual one, and it takes about 20 minutes. If your installment payment arrangements, in your payment installment arrangements, who is the lender, who is the supplier, and are they the same legal entity? If they are the same legal entity, you are almost certainly outside the new regime. You can stop worrying. If they are not, then somebody in that chain now needs a permission. And if that somebody is you and you did not register for temporary permission, before the 1st of July, you have a live problem that begins on Wednesday morning. I want to close this story with that broader point because it applies well beyond consumer credit, and it is the reason I have given this so much time. Across financial services, employment law, corporate governance, and now workplace health, the pattern of the last 18 months has been the same. Activities that grew up in a regulatory gap are being brought inside the perimeter. And the businesses that suffer in that transition are rarely the ones that were behaving badly. Not the bad boys. The good are being penalized for being good. It always happens. So they are the ones that were behaving reasonably but could not evidence it, or the ones that did not realize the boundary through no fault of their own, that they did not realize the boundary had moved until after it had moved past them. Evidence and the systems that produce it is becoming the load-bearing element of compliance. Good intentions are not. That is story one. Story two, the taxpayer is now your co-investigator. An enforcement vacuum is being filled by machines. Very interesting. Every medium enterprise carries counterparty risk. You extend credit to customers, you depend on suppliers, you accept that some proportion of the businesses that you deal with will fail, and you price that expectation into your terms. What you probably do not price in is the possibility that a consumer or supplier will fail deliberately, extinguish its debts, and reappear within weeks under a new name, run by the same person, trading from the same premises, serving the same clients, and that you will have no practical recourse. That practice is called phonixism. Phonixism, phonixism. And this week, the Insolvency Service confirmed publicly that it has built an enforcement unit specifically to attack it, that the unit is already operational, and that it is using automated analysis to find its targets among the hundreds of thousands of companies that dissolve every year. For the businesses this publication serves, this development cuts two ways. Both of them matter, and most of the commentary I have seen this week has only covered one. First, what has actually happened? The abusive phonixism task force was funded in the November 2025 budget with money to recruit 50 additional insolvency service investigators. It began operating in April 2026 and is expected to be fully operational in next year, 2027. This week, the Insolvency Services Director of Investigation and Enforcement Services, Dave McGrath, spoke about it publicly, and the details he gave are more significant than the announcements itself. The task force is a joint effort between the Insolvency Service, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and Companies House. It will use artificial intelligence and data analytics to identify candidates for investigation. In McGrath's own framing, the challenge is finding the needle in the haystack across the challenge is finding the needle in the haystack across the very large number of companies that dissolve annually, and the task force needs technological capability to do that at scale. Meaning it will need a technological and assistance to do it at a massive scale. He was also candid that enforcement outcomes will not solve the problem and that policy reform will be needed to resolve the underlying tension between allowing honest entrepreneurs whose businesses fail to start again and preventing directors from abusing that same freedom. I think that candor is worth noting. It is not the language of an agency that believes it has the answer. It is the language of an agency that has been given a mandate and a budget and is being honest about the limits of both. Now the numbers, because they explain the political urgency and they are genuinely striking. Excuse me. His Majesty's Revenue and Customs estimates that Phonexism accounted for 22% of the £3.8 billion in total tax losses recorded in 2022 to 2023. That puts the annual cost at roughly £800 million. Against that, the Insolvency Service disqualified 7 directors specifically for Phonexism between 2018 to 2019 and 2023 to 2024, out of 6,274 director disqualifications in total. Seven out of 6,274. Over 6 years against an £800 million annual problem. That is not an enforcement gap, that is an enforcement vacuum, and it is the reason the task force exists. 2 further reforms sit alongside it. The Company Directors Disqualification Act 1986 is set to be amended following consultation to widen the circumstances in which a director who breaks the law can be struck off. And Companies House is continuing its rollout of mandatory identity verification for directors, which for the first time creates a reliable link between a natural person and the sequence of companies they have run. Hold the last point, it is the one that makes everything else work. Now the first age, your counterparties. The immediate commercial implication is defensive. If your business sells on credit, and most professional services firms and many healthcare suppliers do, then Phonexism is a mechanism by which your receivable becomes worthless and your commercial relationship continues as if nothing happened with you as the party who absorbed the loss. The insolvency services own case examples give the texture, and I will give you 3. The owner of a fire alarm installation business in Burton was banned after paying himself close to £100,000 across two companies, while paying His Majesty's Revenue and Customs a little over 5,000. A landscaping business owner in Oxfordshire ignored an existing director ban and left £300,000 of unpaid tax across two companies. And in one of the more extreme cases, a director connected to more than 400 companies received a 9-year ban for helping struggling firms subvert the insolvency process. The point of these examples is not that they are shocking. The point is that they were all discoverable in advance. A director with a pattern of successive company failures, asset transfers between connected entities, and unpaid crown debt leaves a trail in the public record. That trail has always been there. What has historically prevented it from being followed is that following it was manual, slow, and expensive, and that no single organization had both the data and the mandate. The task force changes the economics of that search, and the identity verification program at Companies House makes the trail far easier to follow because it establishes with reasonable confidence that the person running the new company is the same person who ran the old one. So the information asymmetry that made phonexism viable is closing. But listen carefully to how it is closing. It is closing for the enforcement agencies first. It is closing for you second, and it is only closing for you at all if you go looking. The businesses that will benefit from this shift are the ones that build director level checks into their credit and onboarding processes rather than company level checks. Think about what that distinction actually means. A company with a clean 2-year history tells you very little of its director. It tells you very little if its director has closed 4 companies in 6 years. That second fact has always been available. It is about to become both more available and more consequential. The professional bodies have read the same way. The chief executive of R3, the trade body for restructuring and insolvency professionals, welcomed the task force and made the point that phonexism leaves creditors, including small businesses, and the revenue out of pocket. And that strengthened identity checks and improved data sharing should make misconduct easier to identify and act upon. That is an endorsement, but it is also a signal about where the burden of vigilance is expected to fall. Better data does not protect a creditor who does not look at it. Now, the second edge, and this is the one I have not seen covered anywhere else this week, is it is less comfortable and it deserves equal weight. An enforcement unit with 50 investigators, automated screening, and an explicit mandate to increase case volume will investigate more directors. Some proportion of those investigations will land on directors who have done nothing wrong. Consider a business owner who wound up a company for entirely legitimate commercial reasons and started another one in a related field. That person has done nothing improper, but from the perspective of an automated screening system, that is a pattern which resembles the pattern it has been trained to find. And I want to be clear that this is not a criticism of the task force, it is a description of how screening systems work. A system tuned to catch Phoenix operators will generate candidates that look like Phoenix operators. Some of them will be honest. The scale is already meaningful. The Insolvency Act, the Insolvency Service secured 77 criminal convictions, disqualified over 1,000 directors, and wound up 41 companies in the public interest in the 2024 to 2025 year before the task force was resourced, given resources to execute their mandate more effectively. Those numbers are expected to rise. So AI is coming into the picture. Increased case volume does not mean increased wrongdoing. It means increased scrutiny. And scrutiny falls on the innocent and the guilty alike, distinguished only afterwards and only by evidence. So which directors will pass through that scrutiny quickly? The ones who can produce and who can produce on request a clear account of why a previous company failed, what its assets were worth, who they were transferred to, at what price, and on what valuation basis. And which directors will not? The ones who keep no such record because they never expected to be asked such questions. I want to be blunt about the consequences here because it is easy to assume that an inquiry with no adverse finding is an inquiry with no cost. This is not how it works. The professional and commercial consequences of a slow or unconvincing response to an insolvency inquiry can arrive long before any finding of fact. Lenders, landlords, and trade counterparties routinely treat a director associated with prior insolvencies as higher risk, and that treatment shows up as personal guarantees, restricted credit terms, or refused facilities. You do not have to be found guilty of anything to pay for it. There is one more dimension here that I want to name because it will recur in every regulatory story for the next several years. A former advisor to the Treasury warned this week that His Majesty's Revenue and Customs may be moving toward using artificial intelligence to monitor the financial activity of individuals and businesses, pointing to the Spanish tax authority as a possible model and raising concern about the absence of parliamentary debate on the question. The Revenue responded that its data collection is governed by legal safeguards and that artificial intelligence supports rather than replaces human oversight. I'm not going to tell you what to think about that exchange. Reasonable people will land in different places on it, and it is a legitimate matter for public debate rather than for me to settle in a business brief. But whatever view one takes, the operational reality for a business is unchanged. It requires you to be able to demonstrate so the public record about your company and its directors is being read by machines now at a scale and speed that no human enforcement team could achieve, by agencies that share data with each other. That is a permanent change in the environment. It does not require you to do anything differently if your affairs are in order, it requires you to be able to demonstrate that they are quickly, and from records you can actually produce. Story 3, workplace health becomes a measured number, and a measured number becomes a compared one. For as long as most business owners have been in business, employee health has been a private matter between an employer and its people. Sickness absence was a cost you absorbed, managed informally, and did not report to anyone. There was no benchmark, there was no comparison, there was no external party asking how your figures looked against the firm down the road. That has now changed. And it changed on the 6th of July. The government published the latest report from the Keep Britain Working Programme, led by the former chairman of John Lewis, Sir Charlie Mayfield. More than 250 employers, 10 mayoral authorities, and all 3 devolved administrations are now participating. And the substantive announcement buried beneath the participant list is the creation of a workplace health intelligence unit that will track sickness, absence, return to work outcomes, and disability participation across participating organizations. The government's own description of what this achieves is worth reading carefully because it is unusually direct. The new unit will make workplace health performance visible for the first time. Visible. That is the word that matters. And it is the reason this belongs in a strategic brief rather than a human resources newsletter. Let me give you the scale of the problem being solved because the economic case is not seriously contested. And you should understand why the state is moving here. Approximately 1 in 5 working age adults in the United Kingdom is now outside the labor force. Around 2.8 million people are out of work specifically because of long-term sickness. The review that produced this program estimated the cost to the state of health-related economic activity at £212 billion each year, of which roughly 2 billion is direct National Health Service cost, and the remainder is lost output, lost tax, and welfare expenditure. Sir Charlie Mayfield's framing of the opportunity is that this represents growth hiding in plain sight. That keeping people healthy and in work is simultaneously the right thing to do and the single largest available lever on national productivity. And that is not a zero-sum negotiation between employers and employees because both sides and the taxpayer gain from the same outcome. The political context sharpens the point considerably. The welfare bill is forecast to account for a little under a quarter of total government spending in the 2025 to 2026 financial year. Whichever administration is in office over the coming period will face acute pressure to reduce that figure. And there are only 2 available routes: cut entitlement or reduce the number of people who need it. The second route runs directly through employers, it runs through you. So what is actually being proposed? Alongside the intelligence unit, the program has recommended piloting workplace health assessments described in the coverage as health checks for new employees as a preventative measure at the point of hire. Around 200 organizations have signed up as vanguard employers to trial new approaches to keeping people in work and helping those who are absent to return safely. And the program proposes reform of the FIT note system, replacing or supplementing it with structured stay in work and return to work plans with eventual integration into the National Health Service app. Each of those elements is on its face benign and voluntary. Together they describe an infrastructure, and infrastructure has a way of becoming a standard. Here is the mechanism a board should understand because it has played out several times before in adjacent areas and the sequence is consistent. First, a voluntary program establishes a measurement framework and recruits large, visible employers to participate. Second, the data produced by that framework creates for the first time a defensible benchmark, a number that says what good looks like. Third, that benchmark becomes the reference point in procurement questionnaires, in insurance underwriting, in tender documents, in due diligence, and in employment tribunal reasoning about what a reasonable employer would have done. Fourth, and often years later, some part of it becomes a statutory obligation, and by that point, the businesses that participated early have already built the systems, and the ones that did not are starting from zero under a deadline. Gender pay gap reporting followed almost exactly this path. So, in a different domain, did carbon reporting. Gender pay gap reporting almost followed exactly the same path. So the Keep Britain Working program is at stage 1, and the Workplace Health Intelligence Unit is the mechanism for stage 2. The participant list tells you where this is heading, and I want you to hear the names: British Airways, Tesco, Royal Mail, Sainsbury's, EDF Energy, Currys. These are organizations with the scale to absorb new reporting obligations, but more importantly, and this is the part to hold on to, they are organizations that sit at the top of long supply chains. When a large employer builds a workplace health measurement capability, the question it eventually asks its suppliers is whether they have one too. That is how a voluntary framework for 250 large employers becomes a de facto requirement for the several thousand medium enterprises that sell to them. You will not receive a letter from the government about this. You will receive a procurement questionnaire from a customer. So what should a medium enterprise take from it? There are 3 implications, and they apply differently depending on your sector. This is quite long. Last weekends were short, but this is a lot of information which you need. If you are in healthcare, this is the largest strategic development in your operating environment this month. The program explicitly repositions workplace health as a shared responsibility between employers, employees, and the National Health Service, with employers taking on prevention and early intervention while the health service concentrates on diagnosis. That is a significant reallocation of function, and the reallocation of function creates commissioning, service design, and commercial opportunities for organizations positioned to deliver the prevention layer. If that is your business, this is an opportunity story, not a compliance story. If you are in professional services, you are literally to be the organization your clients ask about this. But you are also directly exposed to it because knowledge work businesses carry a disproportionate burden of long-term absence driven by mental health and musculoskeletal conditions, both of which are addressable through exactly the kind of early intervention the program is designed to promote. If you're in financial services, the relevant lens is workforce risk in a regulated environment. Certification regimes, conduct rules, and key person dependencies mean that a long-term absence in a regulated role is not merely a productivity cost. It is a control gap, and it is one that a supervisor is entitled to ask about. Across all three, the practical action is the same and it is not expensive. You should know this weekend that your sickness absent rate actually, you should know this weekend what your sickness absence rate is, how it has moved over the last 24 months, and what proportion of your absence is short-term and episodic against long-term and continuous. Those are different problems with different solutions, and most medium enterprises can produce the first number but not the second. If a benchmark is coming and the creation of a workplace health intelligence unit is a fairly clear signal that one is, then the organization that already knows its own number is in a position to act on the comparison. The organization that does not will spend its first 6 months building a measurement capability while its competitors are already improving. Now, I want to state the counter-argument fairly because this publication does not exist to cheerlead for regulation, and you deserve the other side of this. A measurement framework imposed on employers can become a compliance exercise that consumes management attention without improving anyone's health. That is a real risk, and it has happened before. And it can create perverse incentives. A business that measures absence and is judged on it has an incentive to discourage people from reporting illness rather than to make them well. Germany's move this week to require workers to see a doctor on the first day of sickness illustrates the direction that particular instinct can take. The program's designers appear alert to this, and which is why the metrics chosen are return to work outcomes and disability participation rather than raw absence days alone. That is a meaningful design decision, and it deserves credit. Whether it holds up under pressure is a fair question, and the honest answer is that we will not know for 2 or 3 years. But the underlying trend that workplace health is moving from a private cost to a measured, compared, and eventually reported metric is not seriously in doubt. And planning around it is prudent regardless of what one thinks of the policy. So, We end that. We have had 3 stories, 3 decisions your board should take before the weekend is over. 1, establish whether the perimeter has moved under you. If your business offers customers any form of installment payment or has a commercial arrangement with the finance provider who does, identify in writing who the lender is, who the supplier is, and whether they are the same legal entity. If they are different entities, establish which party holds the relevant permission. This takes under an hour. It requires no external advice, and it is the difference between discovering on Wednesday morning that you are compliant and discovering on Wednesday morning that you are not. The registration window for temporary permission closed on the 1st of July. There is no longer a straightforward remedial route for a firm that finds itself inside the perimeter without permission. If that is your position, you need advice on Monday, not in August. 2, move your credit and onboarding checks from the company to the director. The information that identifies a Phoenix operator has always been in the public record. The insolvency service is now building an automated capability to read it. You can read it too, and you can read it before you extend credit rather than after you have written it off. Adding a direct history check to your customer onboarding and supplier approval process is a low-cost change with an immediate risk reduction. And if it is one of the very few controls that protects you against a loss, that no insurance policy and no contractual term will recover. 3, find out what your own sickness absence number is. Not an estimate, the actual figure split between short-term episodic absence and long-term continuous absence for the last 24 months. If your systems cannot produce that split, that is itself the finding, and it tells you what to fix first. A measurement framework is being built that will in time make this number comparable across employees. The businesses that will benefit from that comparison are the ones that knew their number before it became public. Now here is what connects all 3, and it is the argument this publication makes every week in different clothes. Name these 3 decisions. None of these 3 decisions requires you to predict the future. Each of them simply requires you to establish a fact about your own business that you do not currently have to hand, and that someone else will shortly have to hand about you. A regulator, an enforcement agency, a customer, or a benchmark. The strategic advantage in every one of these situations belongs to the party that knows the fact first. And in each case, that party can be you this weekend at almost no cost. Strategic intelligence is only worth something inside the window in which you can still act on it. All 3 of these windows are open. 2 of them close within days. Visit frederickcybersecurity.com to find out how we support medium enterprises in financial services, professional services, and healthcare on regulatory readiness, operational resilience, and counterparty risk. The full written edition of this weekend's brief is on LinkedIn. Subscribe to this channel at Frederick Wakulyaka 4561. I'm Frederick Wakulyaka. Have a productive weekend, and I will see you next week.